Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Legal Awareness series. Today, India celebrates the 131st birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and it is also a moment for rejoicing because we also celebrate Baisakhi and Mahavir Jayanti also. And I wish all the listeners the best of the occasion. Now, as we know that the celebration of 131st birth anniversary, that is the Ambedkar Jayanti, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, for the students of law, needs no introduction as such. But then there are lots of knowledge to be gained from the great works and writings that he have done. And he being one of the chief architect of Indian Constitution, who was a scholar per excellence, he was a philosopher, a visionary, an emancipator of the depressed classes, and he was true nationalist. Now he held, as we know, a number of social movements to secure human rights to the oppressed and depressed sections of the society, and he stands as a therefore a symbol of struggle for social justice. And as a law student and as a member of the legal fraternity, uh, for furthering the ideology and message of Dr. Ambedkar among the students, both within and outside India, we actually celebrate Ambedkar Jayanti as one of its main purpose. Now, his works are very relevant in today's time, as it were at the time it was written and it was penned. And he firmly believed that our political democracy must stand on the base of social democracy, which means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, fraternity as the principles of life, which are enshrined in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, which, as we know, has been taken from the French Revolution. Uh, the guarantees, granted during the French Revolution. Now, in today's short, presentation, I've divided, my part, presentation into three parts. First, I'll begin and try to relate his works with Buddhism, and later on his contribution to the legal field in terms of reforms in legal education, and reforms, social reforms also. And thirdly, I'll speak about the relevance of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar with respect to environmental issues that the global community and India in particular are facing today. So let me then begin with his relevance with Buddhism. And we know that there is more to Ambedkar than his association with Buddhism. But to begin with, how he looked at Buddhism, unlike the other traditional, the interpretation given in the Theravada, and in the Mahayana, and in other, disciplines like the Vajrayana Buddhism, which emerged in Tibet. So unlike the conventional understanding of Buddhism, which normally traditionally people believed, Ambedkar had a very revolutionary approach. So in a way, he wanted to interpret Buddhism, of course, from the moral ethical perspectives. There is no departure as such from the teachings of the Buddha, but then he wanted to make Buddhism a more socially engaged religion in that sense. So, in that respect, for example, he actually has a different take when we talk about the renunciation that Prince Siddhartha has taken. the reason for renunciation in the traditional conventional understanding is that Prince Siddhartha happened to see the four sides, which we call the old man, a sick man, a corpse, and finally a bhikshu, or a sangha. And that actually led him to ponder over the deeper the philosophies of life, and which actually made him to pursue and begin his search for nirvana, etc. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has a different take on what we call Mahabriksh Karmanan, that is the departure of Prince Siddhartha from the palace in search of spiritual quest. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says, and this kind of version is also believed by famous Indian polymath and historian like D.D. Kosambi, and for example Narayan Guru, the social reformer of Kerala. Now they believe in a very kind of a materialistic interpretation as to the Mahabrikshi Karmanan, or the renunciation of Prince Siddhartha, by saying that there was a natural resource dispute over the river Rohini between the Shakya clans and the Kohiliya clans. And Siddhartha tried to adjudicate, and he tried to mediate, but he did not succeed. He could not bring the parties together in a very conciliatory manner. But nevertheless, he played a very important role, and that was said to be the point which actually led him to renunciate. So these are usually given in the Pali version of the original source, and which can also be true. So there can be n number of more than one reason for Siddhartha to go on his search for enlightenment. Now, so therefore, now when we look at the Navayana Buddhism, that is the from the prism of Navayana, which is a new Buddhist or a new vehicle. Unlike the Hinayana or the Mahayana, now we have and then Vajrayana, now we have a Navayana. And therefore, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's interpretation of Buddhism, it actually gives us an account of action that is based on democratic politics of contest and resistance. And but to remain socially relevant, Buddhism as a religion or as a way of life, they must continue to contribute to a practical impact on the social world, which is so neatly intertwined with the political, in the present context. And for many of the neo-Buddhists, Dr. Ambedkar is being equated as a bodhisattva. That means the one who has got an enlightened mind. So bodhi means enlightened mind, and sattva means an individual or a spiritual warrior of a soul. So therefore, the how Dr. Ambedkar turned the wheel of Dharma towards social justice for all, if you look at from he being a bodhisattva from that perspective. Now, and we know that when Dr. Ambedkar gained recognition as a founding father of the Republic of India and principal draftsman of its constitution, now the Navayana Buddhism came to be identified as a form of what we call socially engaged, Buddhism. And there was paralleling movements for self, there was coinciding with parallel movements for self-determination in economic justice in Tibet, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand. So Ambedkar, Buddhism as such is not well represented in mainstream Buddhist traditional studies. However, because its focus was more on social change, and it appeared to be at odds with the traditional Buddhist emphasis on personal transformation. So for example, for Swami Vivekananda, for Gandhiji, and for others, Buddha was more of a cultural and spiritual, or more of a philosophical figure. And for the likes of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Sri Narayan Guru, etc., He was more of a social, and the reformer or a political revolutionary in that sense. Uh, Now, having said that, now next aspect, I will come to the contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a uh, in the domain of law, both in terms of legislative sphere and as well as he being a jurist and a educationist as well. So, as a a member of the councils. For example, he was as a member of the Bombay Legislative Assembly. What are the legal and social reforms that he brought out in his various capacities? So, for example, as a member of the Bombay Legislative Assembly, and also as a labor member of the Viceroy's Council and as a Rajya Sabha member, Dr. Ambedkar always had the concerns of the last man in the last row of society. That also goes in tandem with Gandhiji's concept of the last man as reflected in his talisman, right? So therefore, the Ambedkar always had the concern, for the last man in the last row of society uppermost in his mind. And for example, when there were certain divisive issues were happening, so he said, when he talked about how normally people say that we are Indian first and Hindus afterwards or Muslim afterwards. So he says that, to quote him, he says, I'm not satisfied with that, and to further quote him, he says, I frankly say that I'm not satisfied with that. I do not want that our loyalty as Indians should be in the slightest way affected by any competitive loyalty, whether that loyalty arises out of our religion, out of our culture, or out of our language. So he further, to quote him, he says that I want all people to be Indian first, Indian last, and nothing else but Indians. And that was what he said in the Bombay legislature in 1938. And he therefore he wanted Indians to have a shared identity, rising above the divisions of religions, class, caste, and high or low culture, and with a sense of feeling that we are all Indians. So the concept of fraternity also comes into play here. And therefore, he was a jurist with no no equals as such. Now, when he was appointed as the first law minister of independent India by Nehru, then as the law minister, he had made various contribution in terms of passing laws to grant rights to the deprived sections, to give them equal status, and strengthen their liberty, and also he sought to bring in the notions to end the notions of high and low. And in fact, these laws were milestones in the history of India. Now, Ambedkar was not only a professor of law and jurisprudence and an accomplished lawyer, but he had a vast legislative experience as well. Now, he was member, as I said, of the Bombay Legislative Council from 1927 to 1939, and the labor member of Viceroy's Executive Council from 1940 to 46. As the labor member, he worked for the welfare of the workers. But even earlier, he had fought against exploitation of the workers by capitalists and the government. Now, whenever he got an opportunity, he went about doing the groundworks for laws meant for protecting the right of the laborers. In 1934, he founded the Bombay Kamgar Sangh, and in 1936, he became the president of Nagar Palika Shramik Sangh. Now, his first political outfit was called Independent Labour Party, and in 1937, he presented bills in the Legislative Council for the abolition of Khoti, Maharvatan, and Halai systems, which were meant to perpetuate feudal, castes and religious exploitation, and campaigned against them. Now, he joined hands with communists and others to oppose the Industrial Disputes Act of 1938, which actually sought to limit the rights of the workers to strike. and he achieved historic success. As the labor member, he was in charge of labor, irrigation, power, social work, and mines. And he also had the working hours of the industrial laborers reduced from 14 to 8. He also introduced the provision for paid leave and had employment exchanges established for skilled and semi-skilled laborers. He also played a key role in getting bills on employees' state insurance, review of the parameters for fixing wages of laborers, labor welfare fund, minimum wages, maternity leave for women, and many other welfare measures passed and also had them implemented as well. Now, he did not do all these for any political gain, and there was no difference between what he practiced and what he preached. And besides promulgation of labor laws and policy making, he played a key role in the formulation of water and energy policies and in economic planning. And therefore, all these made him the creator of modern India. And secondly, he also, with connection to legal reforms, he also contributed a lot to the gender equality and women empowerment. Now, it was Ambedkar who laid the foundation of the laws giving equal status and rights to women. He had played a seminal role in freeing women from the shackles of patriarchy. A committee was set up under the chairmanship of Dr. Ambedkar on 9th April 1948 to study the Hindu Code Bill. Now, the Hindu Code Bill was prepared by Sir Banigal Narsingh Rao, who was another, principal architect of India's constitution. Dr. Ambedkar studied the earlier legislations regarding women's rights, besides Hindu scriptures, ancient texts, Simritis, and other codes, and strengthened the provision of the bill. Now, he hoped to secure women's right to property that we all study in now in family law, Hindu Succession Act, Hindu Adoption Act. He also wanted to ban polygamy, and he wanted to allow divorce on grounds of domestic violence and infidelity, and provide for intercaste marriages and adoption through the bill. Now, this epoch-making piece of legislation, had to face stiff resistance. Now, initially, if we have to trace the kind of conversations and the differences that arose in with regard to this legislation, initially both Nehru and Ambedkar worked together to demolish the arguments of those who were very conservative about the reforms. But later, Nehru also backed out. Now, even women who were living in slave like conditions for centuries, they began opposing the measures mentioned in the bill. Now, faced with opposition from both inside and parliament, and Nehru's refusal to issue a whip to facilitate the passage of the bill, Ambedkar declared that Nehru was unwilling to let the bill pass, had divided into many parts, and had surrendered to the those who resisted. Now, therefore, he resigned from his post. It led to his resignation. Now, a few years later, with Nehru's efforts, the bill that Ambedkar drafted for securing the interest of women were passed in bits and pieces. For example, we now have the Hindu Marriage Act, which was passed in May 1955, the Hindu Succession Act in May 1956, and the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act in December 1956. In 1961, the Dowry Prohibition Act was also passed. Now, that was the legislative, contribution in the field of legislation by Dr. Ambedkar. And now I will move on to the contribution that he made in terms of academic legal education. Now, Dr. Ambedkar presented a plan to the Bombay government for improving the academic standard of the college. He wrote an article titled Thoughts on Improving Law Education in Bombay State. And I think the suggestions that Dr. Ambedkar made are very much relevant in imparting legal education and preparing the future lawyers, leaders, bureaucrats, policymakers of the country, and in order to inculcate interest in law, the many of the suggestions that he made are still relevant and resonates well with today's kind of challenges that we also face in imparting very sound and quality education, in specifically legal education. This suggestion that he made, he talked about the important aspects of imparting legal education at the matriculation stage, so that one can have a very strong foundation. And I think the very basis for introducing the legal education in class 11, 12 in CBSE curriculum is also a very important and wise step in the right direction. And if I have to take you a little bit to what are the thoughts on the reform of legal education that he made, with specific reference to Bombay presidency, but it can be extrapolated and replicated to other areas of the country, both in past and present as well. Um, Now, the perusal of these reports will show that the examiners, for example, the teachers, the examiners have long emphasized the defects in the works of the examiners, the candidates, or the students. First, he pointed out, was the absence of any indication of a correct understanding of the fundamental principles underlying the laws which he is required to study, and secondly, absence of any grounding in general knowledge. And it is very important that one should have a very sound grounding in general knowledge, so that one can, when we talk about, for example, the international law, understanding of international law is incomplete, sorry, without having an understanding of international affairs, comparative international relations, comparative constitutions, and jurisprudence, etc., for that matter, and so it enhances one's understanding of conventional legal subjects. So grounding in general knowledge is very important. Third, he points out the defects in the examinees want of orderly presentation of the subject, and fourth, absence of any sense of relevancy of the answer to the question asked, and fifth, absence of any sense of precision in stating facts, arguments, and opinions, and sixth, inability to express in clear language. Here comes the role of language and what the student has in mind, the communication, what he has in mind, thought, and how to translate that into words, meaningful words. And there are these undoubtedly very serious defects that he pointed in a student of law, and he said that something must be done now to remove them. And the question next arises is how these defects can be removed. Now, we must first of all understand what these defects are due to. And to quote him, Dr. Ambedkar, he says that, in my opinion, these defects are due to two things. First, a faulty curriculum and a faulty method of instruction. And from the educationist point of view, the study of law requires a study of certain other auxiliary subjects, without which the study of law alone would be a certain, would be incomplete equipment for the practice of the profession, right? So I'm reminded of one of the professor, whom Lon Fuller quotes. He says that if you can think about a thing which is related to something else without thinking about the thing to which it is related, then you have a legal mind. Okay, so basically, what we need is that, apart from the technical legal rules, regulations, we also need to have a sound understanding. Our basis foundation should be anchored in good knowledge of politics, good knowledge of society, for example, sociology, good understanding of human nature, that is psychology, right? And economics, for example. So that interdisciplinary, a good foundation is very much required for the better appreciation of legal nuances. Therefore, he points out to the next question what this auxiliary subject should be, that will not be difficult to enumerate. I quote him: if we remember that a lawyer must have a legal mind. Now, in the opinion of a key observer, whom Augustine Barrel quotes approvingly in his Obiter Dicta, a legal mind chiefly displays itself by illustrating the obvious, explaining the evident, and expatiating on the commonplace. Now, disregarding for the moment the quip conveyed in the observation, I further quote, Dr. Ambedkar. I think it contains an important bit of truth insofar as it suggests what the real business of a lawyer is. Now, according to the observation, the business of a lawyer is to argue. Now, so important the part does argument play in a lawyer's business that I'm prepared to say that argument is the summum bonum of a lawyer's being, and a knowledge of the individual, right? And next, he says the essential requisites. If argument is the summum bonum of a lawyer's being, what are the essential requisites for the development of the argumentative ability? And he points out that first is the knowledge of the individual and how he functions in society. And secondly, a knowledge of the working of the human mind. And thirdly, a mind trained to drawing logical inferences and legal reasoning. Now, in addition to those fundamental requirements of argumentative ability, there are other requisites, purely ornamental but nonetheless necessary. That is, when we talk about the seven lamps of advocacy, etc., of grace of language and of orderly presentation. Now, put it in concrete terms, a lawyer training must, apart from the study of law, must also include the study of the following subjects, which include sociology, psychology, logic, rhetoric, and the art of public speaking, and command of a language. And I think many of the 5-year law programs also has these disciplines included. Uh, Now that was what he anticipated, such kind of legal the problems and also the solutions also. Now, none of these subjects form, so these are some personal remarks which I'm going to skip. And the next portion, I'm going to, the third portion. So I've divided his works and writings in terms of his relation to Buddhism, and second to legal reforms, and third to environment. Now, I'm coming to the third aspect, which is environment. Now, the contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to understand the complexities of Indian society has acquired greater, prominence in contemporary times. Now, particularly his discourse on equity, inclusiveness, has made his ideas imperative and critical in the unraveling of realities which were hitherto invisible and unknown to the larger populace. Now, in this part, I make an attempt to identify and contextualize the ideas of Ambedkar to the overarching context of Indian environmentalism, which includes, environmental consciousness, environmental movements, etc. Now, with nature for all and all for nature forming the theoretical crux of Ambedkar's, what we call, in the words of Ananias, the Norwegian philosophy of deep ecology, etc., what he calls eco-philosophy, that each one of us has to develop an eco-philosophy, philosophy of the ecology. So therefore, the theoretical crux of Ambedkar's eco-philosophy, this kind of analysis I'm going to do is carried forth at three conceptual domains: the ideas of Ambedkar from the perspective of environment, exploring the activist role of Ambedkar from the perspective of environmental justice to the poor, and finally the solution he offers to Indian environmental problems by invoking the ideas of Buddhism from the perspective of a biocentric, world, what we call an ecocentric world, rather than from an anthropocentric world vision. What we can the Welton Schwang, the world view of human relations vis-a-vis nature. Now, in contemporary times, the concept of environment, as all of us know, has emerged as an omnipresent phenomenon in academic and public discourses as well, in policy discourses as well. Now, in particular, climate change. Within this framework is now, climate change, for example, is accepted as a threat to the well-being of the biotic world. In a country like India, which is sharply stratified socially by various divisions, the social dimension of impact by, specifically the gap between rich and poor, the social dimension of impact by climate change is very critical. Now, from Ambedkar standpoint, I will try to draw a methodological linkages between the ideas of Ambedkar and the phenomenon of environmentalism at one level, and his ideas on Buddha Dhamma and biotic, ecocentric world at another. Now, the main argument which I propose in this part is the concept of inclusive environmentalism, and I posit that adequate, which includes positing adequate representation to the poor people, the scheduled castes and tribes, minorities, women, and other marginalized sections of Indian society in the planning and execution of policies and strategies related to environment, and how it can be formulated and deepened by borrowing ideas from Ambedkar. The concept of public participation, for example, in terms of environmental impact assessment, etc., has a close bearing on this thought. Now, Ambedkar and Green Discourse, undoubtedly, the thought of Ambedkar has embedded within itself, fascinating ecological dimensions that need both theoretical and methodological appreciation. In fact, these ideas are capable of transforming the concept of environment from what we call exotic, which is generally from exotic to that of generally disembedded to the organic, which is thoroughly embedded. Right? Exotic is generally disembedded, and we have to make a shift to the organic, which is thoroughly embedded within each, every one of us as intrinsic to our existence. Now, linkages between the ideas of Ambedkar and the context of Indian environmentalism is essential to comprehend the social and politico ecological nexus between social exclusion and environmental problems. Now, the ideas and practices of Ambedkar, thought from the perspective of ecology, can be located and captured from the prism of intellectual environmental history, which concentrates, on the contribution of philosophers, poets, politicians, and activists towards ecological thought. It must be stated at the outset that the subject of intellectual environmental history has been a less explored domain in India. However, with the critical need arisen to deepen inquiry towards sharpening public sensitivity on environment and the need for more informed policy making on the subject at hand, it has become imperative that the ideas of Ambedkar be critically explored. Existing literature, for example, on intellectual environmental history in India, can be classified into three broad categories. The first category being state centric, which focuses on ideas and contribution of technocrats and administrators employed during British rule. Within this category, particular attention has been devoted to the contributions of H. Cleghorn, who was the founder of Scientific Forest Conservation, and D. Brandes, the father of Indian Forest Service. Now, the second category of intellectual environmental history is generally identified as ethno-intellectual, concentrating mainly on contribution of colonial ethnographers who explored the tribal societies during the British period, like Erwin. No, what was that? very relevant, for example, very relevant, mostly in the northeast of India. Therefore, and the within this framework, it is claimed that these individuals played a crucial role in documentation of the life world of tribes and forest landscapes. And coming to the third category of intellectual environmental history, which deals with ecological dimensions from within nationalist thought. And this is carried forward at two levels: attention to the ideas of native bureaucracy and nationalist bureaucracy, political parties, and nationalist intelligentsia's views on management of common pool resource management, and the ecological dimensions of ideas of prominent political leaders. For example, Mahatma Gandhi in particular has received greatest attention in this process, with his philosophy generally being treated as an epitome of Indian ecological wisdom that must be incorporated in the policies of environmental management. Historically, Indian environmentalism has been mainly dominated by a nationalist perception of ecology. Now, under its persistent advocacy, community centric resource management policies gained prominence in the form of joint forest management, water management, grass and land management, etc. Now, theoretically, the implementation process of these varied reforms required inclusive participation of all stakeholders and equitable distribution of benefits. However, it has been observed that it is at this juncture that the reform process is unable to impact and usher any substantial changes. Now, this fundamental predicament is termed by some studies uh, as being a problem of generation policy reforms in the domain of natural resource management. Now, the impact of social divisions on policy performance within this domain is being identified as one of the key impediments and the utmost reasons for underperformance. Now, within such a context, it has become imperative for Indian environmental discourse to turn and probably incorporate ideas of subaltern intellectuals who advocate for an inclusive Indian society based on the principles of equity, according to Sharma works by great authors like Sharma, Surname, sorry. Third is the concept of the natural resources from Ambedkar's standpoint. Now, generally speaking, the contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the domains of economic thought, politics, for that matter, history, education, religion, received an attention of scholars both within and India and abroad. However, the relevance of his ideas for understanding human and environmental relationship rarely received any adequate attention, with the exception of some studies that attempted to explore the ideas of Ambedkar on water management, interlinking, state water, interlinking of interstate river linkages, or any, common water management system, focusing on the concept of equally driven distributive justice, economically driven distributive justice. So therefore, the ideas of Ambedkar are worth exploring on water management, specifically focusing on the concept of economically driven distributive justice, right? Component of the concept of justice, a theory of justice. Now, Ambedkar, in many of his writings, explicitly brought out the impact of an inequitous socio-economic structure in the usage of common pool resources in India. His primary interest, it could be argued, was to highlight how the low caste system prevented Dalits from accessing common pool resources, which, in his opinion, was the root cause of poverty and pauperization. Now, while for Mahatma Gandhi, restriction on the wants of individual is solution to ecological problems. For the famous adage that the nature has everything for man's need, but not for every man's greed. Uh, but for Ambedkar, democratization of access to resources will solve all the ecological problems. Now, therefore, Ambedkar championed the concept of environmentalism for the poor. Now, let me explain what environmentalism of the poor can be, understood. Now, theories of environmentalism of the poor have much in common with the branch of the green movement that contests the unequal distribution of ecological goods and services, ecological goods and evils also resulting from economic growth, unequal economic growth. Now, these perspectives are distinct from the mainstream current of environmentalism. The environmentalism of the poor are quite distinct. And mainstream environmentalism seeks ecological modernization and eco-efficiency, and also from the older environmentalist current, which are aimed at conserving a pristine nature without human interference, right? So the environmentalism of the poor manifests itself through conflicts that have an ecological element, and including social justice claims, and involving impoverished populations struggling against the state or against private companies that threaten their livelihood, health, culture, autonomy. For example, the Chipko movement, in Uttarakhand. These movements are born from the resistance expressed in many different languages against the disproportionate use of environmental resources and services by the rich and powerful. Uh, Now, if we have to, trace a little bit of the movements and the relevance of how the access to natural resources has various dimensions, and one of them being, for example, the Mahat Satyagraha. The Mahat Satyagraha was a historic, the movement in which one of the issues highlighted by the activism of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was that he advised his followers to violate the age-old restrictions on accessing drinking from common pool resources, which is a vital common pool resource. So, for example, we have in Article 17 of the Constitution of India the abolition of untouchability to temples, to wells, and common, public places. Now, the Mahat Satyagraha took place in a small town of Maharashtra in 1927, and Ambedkar, along with 3,000 followers, violated the traditional restrictions of preventing untouchables from accessing water, which is the most basic need of human being. And Ambedkar therefore took water into his hands from the chowdar tank and violated the age-old untouchability, what we call water untouchability. Now, while most of the studies on Mahat Satyagraha treat the incident as crusade against, caste oppression, while true this incident has historical significance as being one of the pioneering attempts of environmentalism for the poor. Now, it is interesting to note the politico philosophical reflection of Ambedkar on this occasion. Now, he says that, and I quote him, "At the outset, let me tell those who oppose us that we did not perish because we would not drink water from this chowder tank. We now want to go to the tank only to prove that, like others, we also are human being." Now, that is a very basic, human rights argument. Now, environmental historians of India mainly subscribe to the teleological approach. Now, teleological approach mostly relates to the explanation of a phenomenon in terms of the purpose they serve rather than of the cause by which they arise, right? So, therefore, environmental historians of India mainly subscribe to the teleological approach to human environmental relationship, which notes and treats only the resistance of people mainly to policies of colonial state. However, the episode of the Mahat Satyagraha demonstrates the complexity of competing interests of Indian society over access to resources and attempts of marginalized sections of Indian society to fight for justice in the domain of environment. Next, come to the egalitarian environmentalism and Ambedkar. Now, Ambedkar takes recourse to the ideas of Siddhartha Gautama while sourcing his ideas for the arguments he put forth by invoking the ideas of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Ambedkar formulates and introduces the construct of egalitarian environmentalism, which is an antithesis to romantic environmentalism. Now, that is, preservation centric. At the core of this philosophy is the premise that resources of nature are not meant for few, rather for all. And all human beings possess equal rights to use these resources of nature. In the ethical domain of relationship between humans and nature, Ambedkar moves close to the ideas of Marx, who believes in the idea of eco-equality, ecological equality. Uh, this connection between environmentalism and Buddhism in the Ambedkarite point of view are also, yeah, there's a close intersection. They overlap also. Now, in the monumental text, Buddha in his Dhamma, which starts with an analysis of the process of transformation of Siddhartha Gautama to Buddha, as I've mentioned earlier, it happened in the context of Gautama's attempt to find a solution to water disputes between the Sakyas and the Kaulias, which is the tribal confederation of ancient India. Now, the decision of the Shakyas to undertake war against enemy was bitterly opposed by Siddhartha Gautama, who eventually chose the path of self-exile. Now, the point to be noted here is that the character of the Buddha in Ambedkar's vision of Buddhism emerges from eco sensitive resources such as water. Now, the engagement of Ambedkar with ecological justice using the case of Buddha could be seen at three levels. There is the conception of evolution of nature, the relationship between human beings and other living forms, and finally, the ethical aspect of human ecology. Now, while reviewing the process of the genesis of the world in the philosophical tradition of Indian thought, he put forward Buddha's version of nature. For Ambedkar, a biotic world does not have any superior and inferior qualities. So it's quite close to the concept of interdependency, which deep ecology talks about. Rather, all individual things are analogues to one another, and therefore no one can be regarded as the final source to any other. This means that all living forms in the world are mutually dependent upon each other for survival. Uh, while reflecting the social philosophy of Ambedkar, that is the importance of all social class to the broader social system. Now, this concept also closely resembles very intricate ecobiological concept of food chain. Now, Ambedkar thus proposed the concept of socio-ecological egalitarianism, which facilitated the thought process of inclusive environmentalism. Now, another interesting aspect of New Buddhism, which addresses this complex process, is the relationship among human beings and the relationship between living forms and human beings. Okay, so I think I'm taking a little long. I hope it doesn't sound like a lecture. Now, the main crux of Buddha Dhamma, according to Ambedkar, is the engagement of man and the relation of man to man in his life on earth. Now, by invoking Buddha Dharma, Ambedkar was addressing two things. A reflection on the inequities social order, wherein powerful sections exploit nature for selfish class interest, and secondly, visualizing his dream society, that is, a society free from exploitation and deprivation. Now, New Buddhism does not restrict itself to harmonious relationship between human beings alone, but goes to the extent of proposing an organic relationship with all, living forms. And from the Mahayana perspective, what we call the concept of, interdependent origination, interdependent co-arising, what in Sanskrit we call pratitya samutpad. Now, Ambedkar invoked Buddha to reflect upon these as follows. And he quotes, and I quote him, love is not enough. Love is not enough. What is required is matri, fraternity. It is wider than love. It means fellowship not merely with human beings, but with all living beings. So, like the African concept of Ubuntu, I am, therefore you are. So is not such mastery necessary? He questions. What else can give to all living beings the same happiness which one seeks for oneself? To keep the mind impartial, open to all, with affection for everyone and hatred for none. Thus, loving kindness and compassion towards living forms is an essential feature of Buddhism. Now, next is the third important feature is its powerful eco-sensitivity and eco-gospel based on the ethical treatment of all living beings, which I made a mention of, and therefore the ecology has actually emerged as an important phenomenon, as we all know, in the thoughts and writings of Ambedkar also, and therefore, the ideas of Ambedkar reminds us that environmental governance should be crafted based upon the principle of equity and bioethical spirit to cater to the needs of all sections of human society. Uh, yeah. So then next, and its relevance is both at the local and global level as well. So therefore, for him, religion, in the sense of morality, must therefore remain the governing principle in every society, right? Uh, and therefore, he was, through all his works, spanning all disciplines and areas of, life, uh, and polity of a nation, he was constantly and consistently thinking about ways and means of strengthening the nation and ensuring its progress and uniting it, and all this made him the creator of modern India. Now there is one of the creator, we can say, one of the founding fathers, with other historical figures like Vallabhai Patel and Gandhiji, and other historical figures, Nehru, and other the freedom fighters, whose ideals we should always cherish. Now therefore I should come now to the conclusion, and there is a great deal that we can actually learn from Dr. Ambedkar's ideology and philosophy, and which would be beneficial to the law students as a student of constitutional law, and to the other aspiring student fraternity, and as a responsible citizen of India, the along with great ideas by other thinkers like Swami Vivekananda, and Sardar Vallabhai Patel and Nehru, and other important past and present leaders of the country, we should envision an India, and it is one of his Dr. Ambedkar's contribution. Should not be forgotten, and ultimately it is beneficial to our nation building endeavor, right? So I wish everyone a very happy Ambedkar Jayanti, and thank you very much. I hope you will not mind the long time, but it was consuming. I hope it's worth it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.